So, crazy thing. A is the vertical stretch. B is the horizontal stretch. They're the reflections. C is your horizontal translation. Vertical is your vertical translation. Nothing crazy about here. The only difference is that they call your, okay, we'll go y equals a sine b x minus c plus d. Okay. So the only difference in these, vertical stretch, reflection in the x, vertical, horizontal stretch, reflection in the y. The only difference in wording is they call this a horizontal phase shift instead of translation. And then you do all the rest the same. And then this they call a vertical displacement. Only in trig. Yes, you do. This is what's going to put you over the edge. The word displacement.
Yes.
Not the other, like, not that.
Like,
Not that.
Programmed.
Not that. Just displacement. Okay. Interesting. I think that's way worse.
That's new stuff. That's like
Embedded, and then we just
and now I have to
toss something new at you.
Mm-hmm.
Just not in trig. Okay. Get ready. Here we are. First try. Okay, this is a 3. It's at the back. Is it with the x?
No.
If it was with the x, it would be in brackets, which it's not. So this is a vertical displacement. Three units up. Now remember, what affected my amplitude? Do you remember what affected my amplitude? Making it taller or shorter? What would take your amplitude from 1 and -1 and make it taller or shorter? Which transformation, guys, affects your amplitude? Making it taller or shorter? What kind of stretch? Your vertical stretch is your amplitude, correct? We went over that. The period, what affected the period, making the graph wider or narrower? The horizontal stretch affected your period. You just took the 2 pi and you multiplied it by the horizontal stretch and you got your new period, correct? So, what is the vertical translation going to do? Is it going to change my amplitude? If I just take the whole graph that looks like this and go, move it 3 up, did it change the amplitude? No. What's the only thing that changes my amplitude? Vertical stretch. We agree? All right. This here, your D value, the one at the back, gets you your midline. So my midline, or I can call it my median value, is y equals 3. It's y equals 3. Because we're taking our entire sine graph and just moving it 3 up. We agree? Our normal sine graph, guys, looks like this. It starts at 0, 0, and it goes like this, and it has an amplitude of 1, and it maxes out at 1, and it mins out at -1. And you didn't know this, but it actually has a midline, the line that cuts the graph in half, at y equals 0. We agree? So now that y equals 0 line has been moved to y equals 3, because it's been moved 3 up, correct? So now we have a horizontal line at y equals 3, but I'm still maxing out 1 up, minning out 1 down, maxing out 1 up, minning 1 down, because my vertical stretch is still 1. My amplitude is still 1, correct? So how high did this graph go to? 4. And now where did it go to? Below. 2. So what's my range? Y such that 2 is less than or equal to y is less than or equal to 4 YER. So I could sketch it to get my range, right? Or I could just use my midline and add to it my amplitude. So if I know my midline being my D value, if I take my D value and I add my amplitude to it, which is 1, I'm going to get 4. If I subtract my amplitude from it, I'm going to get 2, and I'd have my range, correct? So a way you can find your maximum easily is do your D, which is your midline, plus your amplitude. So in this case, what's my D value? 3. And what's my amplitude? My vertical stretch, which is 1. So my max is out at 4. And then what's my minimum? I just do my D minus my amplitude. So my D is 3 minus 1, and it mins out at 2. How do I get the period of this graph? It's what? It's 2 pi. Why? Yeah, my horizontal stretch is what's in front of my x, and it's a 1. So has the graph been stretched wider or narrower at all? No. And sine graphs and cos graphs have periods of 2 pi. Or 3/60 of 7 degrees. So what does that 3 do? What does that number at the back do? All it does is it moves the graph up 3 or down 3, correct? So it changes the range. Your D value is going to change your range, because it's going to take the whole graph and shift it up or shift it down. Okay. I want you to try 2 and 3. Give me the, oh, I forgot to do mapping. Liar. X, Y, X, and then Y plus 3. Sorry. So I want you to do transformations for both of these and mapping. And then I want what's the range and the period. You can bypass the third column. So this one has a vertical displacement. Two down, which means my mapping is xy becomes x comma y minus 2. My midline is at y equals negative 2. And so y equals, because all horizontal lines are y equals lines. That's why the x-axis is y equals 0. Right? Now your range, your maximum, is your d plus your amplitude. My d is negative 2. My amplitude is my vertical stretch. My vertical stretch is just a 1. So this one's going to max out at negative 1. So that's the highest it goes. So this entire graph is actually below the x-axis, right? And then your minimum is d minus amplitude, which is negative 2 minus 1, which is negative 3. Now in interval notation, range is really easy. You just go low to high. So negative 3, negative 1, square brackets. In set notation, you still go low to high. You just need inequality signs. They're always less than signs. So we do y such that your minimum, your lowest, is less than or equal to y, is less than or equal to negative 1, yer. The period is still 2 pi or 360 because my b, my horizontal stretch, is still a 1. This one has a different amplitude. The amplitude's not just 1, right? So this one has a vertical stretch by a factor of 3 about the x-axis. So it has an amplitude, just to help myself out, of 3. And then it has a vertical displacement two units up. So the xy becomes, everything happens to my y, because my x is just sitting here all by itself, like nice and lonesome. So my mapping will be lonesome too. So I'll get 3y plus 2. I have a midline at y equals 2, which will help me get my range. And I know I have an amplitude of 3. So these two things help me get my range. My maximum is d, my midline, plus my amplitude. So my midline, the middle line is 2. And then I go up 3 to get to what? 5, right? And then my minimum is d minus amplitude. So my midline is at 2, and I go down 3 to get to negative 1. So you can just visualize it if you didn't want to show the work. The reason why it's important to be able to do these is sometimes they'll give you equations without numbers. It'll be like y equals a sine x plus d, and then you'd say d plus absolute a or d minus absolute a. So in set notation, my lowest is negative 1 to 5. In interval notation, that's interval notation, sorry. In set notation, it's negative 1 is less than or equal to y is less than or equal to 5, yer. I see people on the test who don't actually have a clue of how they're writing this, so they're just guessing. That scares me. These signs should be in the same direction because you're reading from the y. So what does that mean? This means y, and if it's open to it, it means greater than, right? So y is greater than or equal to negative 1. And then this way, y is less than or equal to 5. That's why they're in the same direction, because you're reading from the y, not actually left to right. The period, still 2 pi or 360, because nothing has changed. Okay, C4, flip over. C5, still no change in that period. C6, this is the catch now. If the axis is in radians, my period has to be in radians. If my axis is in degrees, my period has to be in degrees. What do we have to do with this 1 over 2? We have to take it out, and then it's going to be 1 over 2. People will tell me it's 7.5. It's not 7.5. When you take a half out of 15, it's actually 15 divided by half, which is 15 times 2. So it's 30. So that's going to have to be in degrees, and then here. So I want you to do 4, 5, 6, 7. Go. 4, 5, 6, 7. So we have a vertical stretch by a factor of 2, not negative, about the x-axis. The negative makes us have a reflection. Remember, it has to be SRT, reflection in the x-axis, and a vertical displacement three units down. Mapping all affects the y because the x is still sitting by itself. So we get x, y becomes x comma negative 2y minus 3. So my midline is at y equals negative 3. So is the d value. My amplitude is 2. So it's just the vertical stretch. Nothing to do with the reflection. The reflection makes it go down or up, just changing the look of the graph, but it doesn't change the amplitude. All right, what's the range? So our maximum is d, which is negative 3 plus our amplitude, which is 2, so negative 1. Our minimum is d, which is negative 3 minus our amplitude, so negative 5. And so our range in interval notation is negative 5 to negative 1. In set notation is y such that negative 5 is less than or equal to y is less than or equal to negative 1 yer. The period is still 2 pi or 360 because nothing happens to the x. And there's no c value, so I don't know if it's in radians or degrees, so I'm writing both. Then we're going to flip over. So this one, we have a vertical stretch. We have to start with stretches first. Vertical stretch by a factor of 1/3 about the x-axis. No horizontal stretch because there's a 1 in front of the x. We have a reflection in the x-axis. We have a vertical translation 2 up. That's a lie. Vertical displacement 2 up. And a horizontal phase shift. Pi over 2 units, right? Our midline is still based off the d. Midline y equals 2, and my amplitude is still off my vertical stretch, which is 1/3. So my maximum is going to be d plus my amplitude, which is 7/3. And then my minimum is d minus my amplitude, which is 5/3. So I'm going to get from 5/3 to 7/3 in interval notation for my range, or y such that 5/3 is less than or equal to y is less than or equal to 7. YER. And the period, because this is in radians, the period is 2 pi, because the b is 1. There's no horizontal stretch. Boom, horizontal stretch, and life has changed. So here, it only affects our x's. We have a horizontal stretch by a factor of 2, always flips, about the y-axis. And a horizontal phase shift (30 degrees right). For my mapping, xy only affects x, so I'm going to get 2x plus 30 degrees y. Remember, you have to have the degree symbol or it's a radian. Our midline is still my d value, hasn't changed. Y equals 0. My amplitude is 1, because I can go plus 0 at the back, and I can add a 1. So my maximum is 0 plus 1, which is 1. My minimum is 0 minus 1, which is negative 1. In set notation, or interval notation, it's negative 1 to 1. In set, it's negative 1 is less than or equal to y is less than or equal to 1, YER. The period, because this is in degrees, the 30 is in degrees, I'm going to use 360 degrees and times it by the horizontal stretch, which is not a half. It is 2, so it's 720 degrees. It's going to get wider. I'm taking that 360, I'm stretching it by 2. This one, I have a horizontal stretch by a factor of 1/3. So the graph is shrinking horizontally about the y-axis. And a horizontal phase shift pi over 2 units right. My mapping is xy becomes 1/3 x plus pi over 2 comma y. My midline is y equals 0, because that's what's at the back. My amplitude is 1, because I have no vertical stretch. And my range is going to be the same as this. 0 plus 1, which is 1. 0 minus 1, which is negative 1. Negative 1 to 1. Negative 1 is less than or equal to y. It's less than or equal to IR. C value is in radians, so my period is 2 pi times the horizontal stretch, which is 1/3. So I get 2 pi over 3, which makes sense because I took my 2 pi and I shrunk it by 1/3, right? So 2 pi thirds. Your homework, I'm going to check Fridays. I'll rewrite Fridays up here just in case you forgot about it. Fridays was page 233, numbers 4 to 9. I'm checking that tomorrow with my eyeballs. And then that was Fridays. And then today's is page 250. Number 1, CDE. Number 2, DEF. These are just asking for the horizontal phase shift and vertical displacement on a sine and cosine. If this is cos or sine, it doesn't change it, right? It just changes the look. And then 3 and 4 are matching. What's today's date? 24th. Oh, I don't know. My day 1s and 2s are the exact same. So tomorrow my eyeballs will be checking these two. They're written down. If you're someone who missed Friday's homework check, page 306, 2, 4, and 8, you can call me over if you want right now and I'll look at it.